The station woke up before the sun. The air was cold and slightly wet, and the sound of trains moving in the distance mixed with the voices of early travelers. Vendors were opening their small stalls, sweeping dust from the ground, arranging teacups and lighting tiny stoves. Some people looked sleepy, some looked worried, and some looked hopeful, as if the day might bring something new. Near the edge of the platform, an old woman slowly walked toward her usual spot. Her steps were careful, but steady. She carried a small woven basket in her hands. Inside the basket were fresh flowers, simple, colorful, and softly fragrant. Roses, jasmine, and marigolds rested together, tied in small bunches with thin thread. Her clothes were clean but old. Her shawl was faded from many winters and summers, yet she wrapped it tightly around her shoulders as if it were precious. Her hair was almost fully white, tied back neatly. Her face showed many lines, but her eyes were calm, warm, and gentle. Every day, she came to the station at the same time. She never shouted to attract customers. She never begged. She only sat quietly, holding her basket, offering flowers to those who passed by. Some people ignored her without even looking. Some smiled politely but walked away. A few stopped and bought flowers, sometimes for prayer, sometimes for loved ones, sometimes just because they felt sorry for her. She thanked everyone the same way, with a soft voice and a small smile. Behind her quiet life was a long story of struggle. Years ago, she had lived in a small house with her husband and children. Life had never been easy, but it had been warm. Then, one by one, things changed. Her husband fell ill and passed away. Her children left the town to find work in big cities. At first, they sent messages and money. Slowly, the messages became fewer. The money stopped. She did not blame them. She believed that everyone carried their own burdens. She did not want to trouble anyone with her pain. So she chose to stand on her own feet, even when her legs grew weak and her hands trembled. Selling flowers was not just work for her. It was dignity. That morning, the crowd at the station was smaller than usual. A light rain had fallen during the night, and the ground was still damp. People walked carefully to avoid puddles. The sky was pale gray and the air felt heavy. The old woman sat down on her wooden stool and placed her basket on her lap. She looked around quietly, observing faces, footsteps, and stories passing in front of her. Then she noticed someone different. A young man was sitting alone on a bench not far from her. He looked tired, not in the way people looked after a long journey, but in a deeper way. His shoulders were slightly bent forward, his hands resting loosely on his knees. He stared at the ground as if he was lost in thoughts he could not escape. His clothes were neat, but they looked worn from travel. His shoes were dusty. There was no bag beside him, no phone in his hands, no one waiting for him. The old woman watched him for a moment. Many people came to the station every day, but something about him felt heavy. It was not just sadness. It was a kind of silence that comes when someone feels completely alone. A few minutes passed. The crowd moved around him, but he did not move. A train arrived. Doors opened. People rushed in. But he stayed on the bench. The old woman felt a strange pull in her heart. She picked up a small bunch of jasmine flowers from her basket. They were simple, white, and fragrant. She stood up slowly and walked toward the young man. Her steps were quiet. He did not notice her until she stood in front of him. He looked up, surprised. She smiled gently. "Flowers?" she asked softly. He looked at the flowers, then at her face. For a moment, he seemed confused. He slowly shook his head. I don't have money," he said quietly. His voice was calm, but tired. The old woman looked at him for a second, then held the flowers closer to him. "Take them," she said. He frowned slightly. "No, I can't." She placed the flowers in his hand before he could stop her. "Sometimes," she said, her voice steady, "you don't need money to receive something good." He stared at the flowers in his palm. They were small and simple, yet they looked bright against his dark thoughts. He looked up at her again. "Why are you doing this?" She shrugged slightly, as if the answer was obvious. "Because you look like someone who needed them," she said. He did not know what to say. Words seemed heavy in his mouth. After a moment, He nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said. She smiled once more and walked back to her stool. He stayed there, holding the flowers, breathing in their soft scent. For the first time in many days, something inside him felt a little lighter. The old woman returned to her basket and continued her quiet work. She did not think much about what she had done. For her, it was just a small act of kindness, nothing special. But life often changes because of small things. As the morning moved forward, the station became busier. More trains arrived. More people rushed past. The old woman sold a few more bunches of flowers. The young man stayed on the bench for a long time. At one point, he stood up, walked a few steps, then stopped. He turned back and looked at the old woman from a distance. She was arranging flowers in her basket, her fingers moving slowly but carefully. He walked toward her again. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. "I hope the flowers helped," she said. He nodded. "They did," he replied. After a pause, he added, "I'll repay you someday." She shook her head gently. "No need," she said. "Just remember that kindness exists." He looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to memorize her face. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. The old woman watched him leave, then returned her attention to her flowers. She did not know his name. She did not know his story. She did not know that her small gesture would one day come back to her in a way she could never imagine. For her, it was just another morning at the station. But for him, it was the first light after a long, dark night. And somewhere between the noise of trains and the footsteps of strangers, a quiet connection had been born, one that time would not easily erase. The next morning, the young man woke up before the sun. He had spent the night on a wooden bench near the station. The air was cold, and the noise of trains had never fully stopped. Yet, he had slept more peacefully than he had in many days. The small bunch of jasmine flowers was still in his hand. For a moment, he just looked at them. They were slightly crushed, but their scent was still gentle and fresh. He remembered the old woman's eyes, her calm voice, and the way she had placed the flowers in his hand without hesitation. He had met many people in his life, but very few had shown kindness without expecting anything in return. He slowly sat up and looked around. The station was waking again. Vendors were preparing tea. Porters were stretching their tired arms, and travelers were pulling heavy bags across the platform. He felt embarrassed, not because he had accepted the flowers, but because he had nothing in his life at that moment. No job, no plan, no money, and no clear direction. He stood up and walked toward a water tap to wash his face. Cold water touched his skin, and he felt more awake. He looked at his reflection in the cracked mirror nearby. "You can't stay like this," he whispered to himself. He had come to the city with big dreams. He believed he would find work quickly and build a better life. But things had gone wrong. The company that promised him a job had canceled the offer. His savings had disappeared in rent and food. He felt ashamed to call his family because he didn't want them to worry. For days, he had wandered around the city, searching for work, facing rejection after rejection. That night at the station had felt like the lowest point of his life. Yet the old woman's simple act had touched something deep inside him. He walked back toward the platform where she usually sat. She was already there. Just like the day before, she sat quietly on her small stool with her basket of flowers. The morning light fell softly on her white hair. She was arranging her flowers carefully, as if each one mattered. He walked toward her slowly. She noticed him and smiled. "You came back," she said softly. He nodded. "I want to say thank you again," he said. She waved her hand gently, as if his words were unnecessary. "You already did," she replied. He hesitated for a moment, then sat down a few steps away from her. For a while, neither of them spoke. People passed by. Some bought flowers. Some ignored them. Life moved on around them. But the young man stayed still. After a few minutes, he spoke again. "Do you come here every day?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes," she said. "This place is my work, my routine, and sometimes my only company." He looked around the station. It felt noisy and crowded, yet lonely at the same time. "Is it hard?" he asked quietly. She thought for a moment. "Life is hard," she said. "But Sitting and crying makes it harder. Doing something makes it easier. Her words were simple, but they felt heavy with experience. He looked down at his hands. I don't know what I'm doing anymore, he said softly. Everything I planned failed. She listened without interrupting him. After a moment, she said, plans often fail. People don't. He looked up at her. You are still here, she continued. So your story is not finished. He did not reply, but her words stayed in his mind. A train arrived with a loud sound. People rushed past them. The old woman stood up and offered flowers to travelers. The young man watched her silently. She was old. She was poor. She was tired. Yet she was still standing, still working, still smiling. He felt something shift inside him. When the crowd became smaller again, he stood up. I should go, he said. She looked at him. Where? She asked. Anywhere, he replied with a faint smile. But not nowhere. She nodded approvingly. That's enough, she said. He hesitated, then spoke again. One day, he said, I'll come back and repay you. She smiled, not as if she expected it, but as if she found his words sweet. Just don't forget that you are stronger than you think, she said. He nodded. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the flow of people. The old woman watched him for a few seconds, then returned to her flowers. She did not know that he would remember her for years. She did not know that her words would follow him like a quiet voice in his mind. She thought he was just another lost traveler who had passed through her life. But he was not. Far away from the station, the young man walked through the city streets. Buildings rose high around him. Cars moved fast. People hurried with serious faces. He felt small in the middle of it all. Yet, something inside him felt different. He began to search for work again, not with desperation, but with determination. He visited small shops, offices, and workshops. He asked questions. He listened. He accepted temporary jobs, even if they were not what he dreamed of. Some days were humiliating. Some days were exhausting. Some days felt hopeless. But every time he felt like giving up, he remembered the old woman's voice. People don't fail. Plans do. So he kept going. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, his life began to change. He found a steady job in a small company. The salary was not high, but it was enough to survive. He rented a tiny room near the city center. He stopped sleeping at the station. He worked harder than anyone else. He arrived early. He left late. He learned everything he could. When others complained, he stayed silent and focused. His co-workers noticed his discipline. His boss noticed his dedication. One day, he was given more responsibility. Then another chance. Then another. He did not become successful overnight. His journey was slow, painful, and full of doubts. But he never forgot where he had started. Sometimes, when he felt tired, he bought a small bunch of flowers from a street vendor and placed them on his table. They reminded him of the old woman. Years passed. The young man grew older. His life grew bigger. He changed jobs, started projects, faced losses, and achieved victories. There were moments when he felt proud. There were moments when he felt broken. But he always moved forward. Eventually, he started his own business. At first, it was small. Then it grew. People began to recognize his work. His company expanded. His name began to appear in business circles. He was no longer the lost young man who slept on a station bench. He became a successful entrepreneur. Money came. Respect came. Comfort came. But something else stayed with him. Memory. Sometimes, late at night, he remembered the station. He remembered the cold bench. He remembered the jasmine flowers. He remembered the old woman's eyes. He wondered if she was still alive. He wondered if she was still selling flowers. He wondered if she still sat on the same stool. He felt a strange guilt. He had promised to repay her. But years had passed. He did not know her name. He did not know where she lived. He did not even know if she would recognize him. One evening, after a long meeting, he stood near his office window and looked at the city lights. For the first time in many years, he felt a strong urge. I need to go back, he whispered. Not for business, not for pride, but for something deeper. He wanted to find the old woman. He wanted to see her again. "I know," he replied. "That's why I came back. You gave me hope when I had nothing. Now I want to make sure you have everything you need." She didn't answer immediately. She studied him quietly, her eyes softening. She had lived through so many disappointments, so many lonely days, that the sudden gesture of care felt almost unreal. "You don't have to do this," she said again, a whisper. "I want to," he said. "Please, let me help you. You shouldn't struggle alone. Not after everything you did for me." For the first time in many years, the old woman felt tears rise in her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of gratitude, of relief, and of recognition. She had never asked for anything in return, and yet here was someone who had remembered, someone who had come back to honor her. "You are very kind," she said, her voice shaky. "I am only kind because you taught me to be," he said softly. She smiled through her tears. "It seems a lifetime has passed since that night." "It has," he said, "but I remembered every detail, every flower, every word you said, and I promised myself that I would come back to you someday." The old woman nodded slowly. She looked around at the busy station. People moved past them without noticing the quiet reunion taking place. A few travelers glanced at them curiously, but most were absorbed in their own lives. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say nothing," he said. "Just let me do this for you. You have earned it." She studied him for a long time, her hands folded on her lap. Finally, she nodded, not because she fully understood, but because she trusted the sincerity in his eyes. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small envelope. "This is just a start," he said. "I want you to live comfortably, safely, without worrying about tomorrow. And I want to make sure you have a place to call home." The old woman took the envelope cautiously. Her hand shook as she opened it, but she did not look inside immediately. Instead, she held it close, feeling the weight not of money, but of care, thoughtfulness, and recognition. "I never expected this," she whispered. "I only did what anyone should do. That's why it mattered so much," he said. "Most people don't do simple things. You did. You changed a life." A soft smile spread across her face. "And you changed your own," she said. For a few moments, they sat in silence. The noise of the station seemed distant, almost irrelevant. Around them, life went on. But in that small corner, the years melted away, leaving only gratitude, warmth, and recognition. "I wanted to tell you," he said, "that your kindness has created ripples. I am not the only one whose life has been affected. The way you treat people, even strangers, matters. It matters more than you know." She looked down at her basket. The flowers seemed brighter in that moment, as if reflecting the light of this unexpected reunion. "I never thought of it that way," she said softly. "I only tried to do what felt right." "Exactly," he said. "That's why it was powerful. You gave me hope when I had nothing. You reminded me that even small gestures can make a difference." She nodded slowly. "And now you are here, showing me that good things can come back." "Yes," he said. "I want you to know that your life matters, that what you do matters, that you are seen." Tears rolled down her cheeks, but her smile never faded. She had lived a long, hard life, and yet, in this quiet moment, she felt seen and valued in a way she had never experienced. Around them, people continued to rush past, buying tickets, carrying luggage, and hurrying to catch trains. The old woman and the man were in a small bubble of time, a moment that seemed to stretch indefinitely. Finally, she looked at him and said, "I don't know what to say. I am grateful more than I can express." "You don't need to say anything," he replied. "Just let me help. Let me make sure you are safe, comfortable, and cared for. That is all I want." For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that someone cared. Not out of obligation, not out of pity, but out of genuine respect and love for what she had done. She nodded once, slowly, finally accepting his offer. "Then let us begin," she whispered. And in that moment, the years of struggle, silence, and loneliness seemed to fade. The station, the noise, the crowds, all of it became a background to the story that had come full circle. A small act of kindness, given in a moment of need, had returned with a force she could never have imagined. and life, in its quiet, gentle way, had brought them back together. The old woman and the man walked slowly away from the station. The air was crisp, and the faint smell of flowers mixed with the scent of wet pavement. He had rented a small car to take her to a quiet part of the city, where she could live safely and comfortably. She looked around nervously and used to being in a car that was not crowded or full of movement, but he smiled at her gently and she relaxed. For years, she had lived in a small, rented room near the station. It was modest, cramped, and often too cold in winter or too hot in summer. She had never complained. She had learned to accept whatever life gave her, to survive quietly and find small joys in the everyday. But now, as the car moved through the city streets, she felt a strange mix of disbelief and hope. You didn't have to do this," she said softly, her eyes fixed on passing buildings. "I wanted to," he replied. "You changed my life when I had nothing. This is the least I can do." She looked down at her hands, which rested on her lap. They were rough, wrinkled, and worn from years of hard work. She had never expected that someone would return the kindness she had given freely. She had never imagined a life where she could rest without worry. After a few minutes, the car stopped in front of a small house. It was simple, painted in soft cream with a small garden out front. Flowers were planted along the edge, bright and colorful even in the weak winter sunlight. She stared at it in silence. This is for me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," he said. "It is yours. You will live here. You will have everything you need. No one will ever ask you to struggle again." Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled. She had never imagined such a life. She had survived every day on her own, never asking for help, never expecting anything more than the small moments she could control. And now, suddenly, everything had changed. He helped her out of the car and guided her inside. The house was simple, but beautiful. Every room was clean, warm, and full of light. There were fresh flowers in vases on tables, soft blankets on chairs, and a small kitchen with everything she could need. "You can live here as long as you want," he said. "And if you ever need anything, I will make sure you have it. You don't have to worry about money, about food, or about safety." She moved slowly through the rooms, touching the walls and furniture as if to make sure it was real. She had lived in bare rooms for decades, and this comfort was almost overwhelming. She could feel her heart beating fast, a mix of gratitude, disbelief, and relief. This is too much," she whispered. "It is not too much," he said. "You earned it. You gave me hope when I had nothing. You reminded me that kindness exists. This is simply a return of what you gave." "I've come back," he said, his voice gentle but steady. "I never forgot your kindness. I wanted to thank you properly this time." She shook her head slowly. "You don't owe me anything," she said softly. "I only gave you flowers. That's all." He knelt slightly, not to lower himself, but to match the quiet humility she had shown him that night. "No," he said firmly. "You changed my life with a simple act. That day, you reminded me that kindness exists even when the world feels cruel. I wanted to repay that." She looked down at her basket of flowers and then back at him. Her hands trembled slightly as if she had not expected this moment in all her life. "You didn't have to," she said again, but her voice was different now. It carried awe, surprise, and a hint of joy. She nodded slowly, still unsure how to respond. Words seemed insufficient to express the feelings swelling in her chest. She had never expected recognition, never expected care, and yet here it was, overwhelming and beautiful. After a while, he led her to a small garden behind the house. The flowers there reminded her of the basket she had carried for years. Roses, marigolds, and jasmine were planted carefully in neat rows. The scent was soft, familiar, and comforting. "I thought you might like this," he said. "A little reminder of the flowers you always sold." She knelt down and touched the petals, closing her eyes. The fragrance brought memories of the past, the cold mornings at the station, the tired travelers, the small smiles of gratitude she had received. And now, those memories were mingled with hope and joy. "I never thought I would see something like this," she whispered. "You deserve it," he said simply. "You taught me that even small acts of kindness can change a life." Now I want to make sure your life is changed too. For the first time in years, she felt safe. She felt cared for. She felt seen. And she realized that her simple, quiet life of giving flowers had not gone unnoticed. The man stayed with her that afternoon, helping her settle in, showing her around the house, and explaining how everything worked. She listened quietly, still overwhelmed by the generosity she had never expected. Later, as the sun began to set, he handed her a small key. "This is yours," he said. "No one can take this away from you. You are free to live here however you want. You will never have to struggle alone again." She took the key with trembling hands. She did not know how to express her gratitude. Tears fell freely now, but her smile was radiant. For decades, she had survived quietly, never asking for help, never expecting more than she could manage. And now, everything had changed because someone had remembered her. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't need to say anything," he replied. "Just live. Enjoy. Be happy. That is all I ask." Over the next few days, she began to adjust to her new life. She explored every corner of the house, opened drawers she had never seen, and carefully arranged the flowers in the garden. The comfort and safety felt foreign at first, but gradually, she began to relax. People from the neighborhood came by, curious about the new resident. They were surprised to see an old woman living in such a beautiful house. Some asked how she had come by it. She simply smiled and said nothing, feeling that words could not capture the story fully. The man returned often, not to supervise or control, but to check on her and spend time with her. He had brought in a few helpers to maintain the garden and keep the house clean, but he respected her space and independence. She could live as she wished, without interference, without obligation. He also arranged for her medical care. She could see a doctor regularly, and all her health needs were covered. For the first time in decades, she did not have to worry about herself. She could focus on living, on enjoying small moments, on finding joy in the days ahead. The flower garden became a special place for her. Every morning, she would step outside, breathe in the fragrance, and remember the small beginnings that had led to this life. The flowers reminded her of the station, of the hands that had held hers, of the hope that had never left her despite the struggles. One day, the man suggested opening a small flower shop near the station in her name. It would be simple, just a few tables and a basket of flowers, but it would allow her to continue her tradition of giving beauty to travelers. She agreed, though cautiously, unsure she could manage anything new. With his help, the shop opened. It was small, cozy, and filled with fresh flowers every day. Travelers were drawn to her gentle smile and her calm presence. People who had passed by her years ago returned, some curious, some remembering her from the past. She did not ask for money. She sold flowers modestly, giving many away freely, just as she had always done. And people began to notice. They were touched by her story and her continued generosity. Through the flower shop, she began to feel connected to the city in a way she had never before. She met kind people, shared her flowers, and continued the tradition that had defined her life. The old woman who had once struggled alone at the station was now living surrounded by comfort, care, and respect, yet she remained humble and giving. The man visited regularly, bringing news of the city, updates about the business, and sometimes just sharing tea and conversation. He never demanded anything from her, never asked her to change. He simply ensured that her life was secure and meaningful. The old woman often reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the night she had given flowers to a lost young man and never expected him to remember. She realized that even small acts, when given sincerely, can have a lasting impact. Her life had been full of struggle, but it had also been full of quiet courage, patience, and care. And now, her courage and kindness had returned to her in ways she could never have imagined. As the days turned into months, she settled into a routine of comfort and purpose. She tended her garden, arranged flowers in the shop, and occasionally sat quietly, reflecting on the life that had brought her here. She never took for granted the second chance she had been given, and she remained humble, kind, and gentle as ever. The man's presence was a reminder of the power of memory and gratitude. He had remembered her act of kindness when few others would have. He had come back to repay her, not out of obligation, but out of respect and love for the impact she had made on his life. Together, they demonstrated something rare, a bond created by generosity, trust, and human connection. The old woman's life, once marked by struggle and quiet endurance, was now filled with care, beauty, and recognition. And the man, who had risen from hardship, had honored the lessons she had given him in the most meaningful way possible. Through the small flower shop, the garden, and the peaceful house, her story became a living example. Kindness is never wasted. Compassion is never forgotten. And the smallest acts can ripple through time to create miracles. She smiled each morning as she opened the door to her garden, feeling the sunlight on her face. He wanted to tell her that her kindness had not been wasted. He wanted to show her that a small act can change a life. That night, he made a decision he could no longer delay. He would return to the station where everything had begun. He did not know what he would find there. He did not know if she would still be there. But he knew one thing. Some debts are not made of money. Some debts are made of kindness. And they must be repaid, no matter how long it takes. The city looked different now, though the station itself had not changed much. The buildings around it were taller, the advertisements brighter, and the trains faster. But the rhythm of the station, the echo of footsteps, the squeal of brakes, the call of porters, remained the same. The young man, now a man with a steady walk and a confident presence, stepped out of his car and took a deep breath. The air smelled faintly of rain and diesel, just like he remembered. For a moment, he closed his eyes and let memories wash over him. The cold bench, the empty platform, and the small white flowers pressed between his fingers. He had come back for a single reason. Years ago, a stranger, an old woman selling flowers at the station, had given him hope when he had nothing. She had believed in kindness, in humanity, in simple gestures that cost nothing but could mean everything. And now, he was determined to find her. He walked slowly through the station, observing the faces rushing past him. People carried bags. Children clutched their parent hands. Vendors shouted over the noise to sell tea and snacks. He asked a few porters if they remembered an old woman who used to sell flowers. Most shook their heads. Some thought he was asking about someone else. Finally, a tea seller in a small stall by the corner leaned forward. "You mean the old woman with the white hair?" he asked. "She comes here sometimes. Not every day, but she's been selling flowers for a long time." The man's heart raced. "Do you know where I could find her?" he asked. The tea seller shook his head. "I'm not sure. She moved a little down the street a while ago. Sometimes she comes back, but she is not as strong as she used to be. Look around near the old tracks. Sometimes she sits there." He thanked the man and began walking toward the quieter side of the station, the side he remembered from all those years ago. The path was narrower now, bordered by walls with faded advertisements. The wooden bench where he had once sat was still there, though weathered and worn. Then he saw her. She was sitting on a small wooden stool near the edge of the platform. Her hair was completely white now, tied in a neat bun. Her shawl was faded, and her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted a bunch of marigolds in her basket. The basket itself was smaller than he remembered. Life had not been kind, but she was still there, quietly doing her work. He hesitated, unsure if he should call out. Would she even remember him? Would she even recognize him after all these years? He took a step forward. His heart thumped loudly. "Excuse me," he said softly. She looked up, her eyes sharp despite her age. "Yes," she asked. He took a deep breath. "Do you remember giving flowers to a young man on a rainy night many years ago?" She blinked. Her eyes softened as she studied his face. For a long moment, there was silence. Then a small smile appeared on her lips. "Yes," she said slowly. "I remember. You were very quiet that day." The man smiled, though his eyes were wet. "I am that young man," he said. The old woman stared at him. She looked at his clothes, his posture, the confidence in his face. Then she looked back at him, as if trying to reconcile the stranger before her with the memory of a young, lost man holding her small flowers. I don't understand," she whispered, and the fragrance of flowers around her. Life had given her a second chance, a life of comfort, purpose, and the quiet joy of seeing the impact of her kindness return to her. And in that peaceful life, she continued to give, not because she had to, but because it was who she was. The world had changed around her, but her heart remained the same, gentle, giving, and full of quiet courage. The old woman had found peace. The man had kept his promise. And the story of kindness, once simple and small, had become something extraordinary. Years passed, and the old woman's life continued in a rhythm that was gentle, quiet, and full of small joys. The house she now called home had become a sanctuary, a place where comfort and peace replaced the endless struggle of her past. Every morning, she stepped into her garden, greeted the blooming flowers, and breathed deeply, letting their fragrance fill her lungs. The sunlight felt warmer than ever, and the simple sound of birdsong became a reminder that life could be gentle. Even after decades of hardship, her flower shop near the station had grown slowly but steadily. Travelers, curious passers-by, and people who remembered her from long ago came to see the woman who had once quietly sold flowers to strangers. Many were inspired by her story, the story of the old woman who had given hope to a lost young man years ago. Some came simply for the flowers, but most left carrying more than blossoms. They left carrying a piece of the lesson she had lived every day, that small acts of kindness mattered more than anyone realized. The man, now firmly established as a successful businessman, visited often, but he never interfered with her life. He would sit quietly with her in the garden, sharing news from the city, or sometimes they would sit in silence, letting the light of the afternoon and the gentle wind fill the spaces between words. In those moments, there was no hierarchy between them, no sense of debt being repaid. It was simply connection, human and profound, built on respect, memory, and gratitude. The old woman often reflected on her life as she worked in the shop. She thought about the countless mornings she had spent at the station, the cold wind biting her face, the heavy basket of flowers in her hands, and the faces of travelers she had never known would remember her decades later. She remembered the young man who had received a bunch of jasmine on a rainy evening. She remembered his quiet, almost shy gratitude, and she remembered the weight of hope she had seen flicker in his eyes. Now, decades later, that moment had returned to her in ways she had never imagined. The kindness she had given freely, expecting nothing in return, had rippled outward, coming back to her in the most profound way. She thought about the strange beauty of life, that sometimes the seeds we plant quietly, without recognition, grow into something far larger than we could ever foresee. Word of her story spread beyond the city. People wrote about her in newspapers, shared her story on social media, and told it to friends and family. Many people were moved, not by her new comfort, not by the house or the financial security she had been given, but by her humility, her resilience, and her generosity. People admired that she had never asked for anything, yet she had given hope to someone who had nothing and had, in doing so, changed a life. In her home, the old woman continued her daily routine, tending to the flowers, arranging them for the shop, and taking quiet walks in the garden. She laughed easily when neighbors visited, listened patiently to the stories of young children, and offered advice gently to anyone who needed it. She became more than a flower seller. She became a symbol of quiet strength, a reminder of the power of kindness, and proof that one person's good heart could affect generations. The man continued to check on her, ensuring she had everything she needed. But he also encouraged her to continue living independently, to keep doing the things she loved. She painted a small section of the shop with bright colors, organized the flowers herself, and greeted customers with the same gentle voice she had used at the station. He watched her quietly from the doorway sometimes, marveling at her strength, the same strength that had helped him survive when he had nothing. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the garden, the man and the old woman sat on a small wooden bench outside the house. She held a cup of tea, steam rising gently into the cool air. He sat beside her, hands resting on his knees, watching the flowers sway in the gentle breeze. "You know," she said softly, "I never thought anything I did would matter so much. I only tried to survive, to be kind in small ways. I never imagined that one simple act could come back in such a way." "It matters," he said, smiling. "Everything you did mattered. You didn't just help me that night. You taught me how to live, how to care, how to remember what is important. And now you are teaching the world by simply being yourself." She nodded, looking down at the garden. "It feels strange to be cared for like this," she admitted. "All my life, I've been the one giving. I never asked for help, and I didn't think anyone would remember. And that's why it's so powerful," he replied, "because it was given freely without expectation. That's why it matters more than anything else in life. And that's why I'm here, to make sure your kindness comes back to you in the way it deserves." She smiled, her eyes glistening in the fading sunlight. For decades, she had endured, quietly, without recognition. And now, at last, the world had acknowledged her, not just with comfort and security, but with the respect and gratitude that her heart had always deserved. The following weeks brought more visitors to her flower shop. People came to buy flowers, to hear her story, and to share their own experiences of kindness. She welcomed everyone with patience and humility, offering a smile, a few words of encouragement, and sometimes a small flower free of charge. Every person who left carried a sense of hope, inspired by her gentle way of being, her quiet courage, and the story of how kindness can travel across years and change lives. The man decided to take one more step. With her consent, he established a small foundation in her name. It was simple at first, designed to help elderly people, struggling vendors, and lonely souls who had been forgotten by society. The foundation provided small but meaningful support, medications, food, housing assistance, and occasional visits to brighten someone's day. It was a way for her legacy to continue beyond the walls of her home and the few streets she knew, a way for her kindness to ripple outward, just as it had done for him. The old woman was humbled by the attention and by the work being done in her name. She often visited the foundation herself, meeting the people who received help, sharing words of encouragement, and occasionally a flower. It reminded her of the simple joys she had always cherished, connecting with strangers, offering a small act of care, and seeing the effect it had on someone else's life. Through this work, she realized that her story was no longer just her own. It belonged to the city, to the people whose lives she touched, and to the young man whose life had been changed that rainy evening. She felt a deep sense of purpose, knowing that the life she had lived, the hardships she had endured, and the small kindness she had given had created something lasting and meaningful. Years later, the old woman grew frail, as all people do with time, but she remained strong in spirit, surrounded by flowers, laughter, and love. The man visited regularly, ensuring she had everything she needed and that her days were filled with peace. She would often sit in the garden, watching the sun rise, listening to the quiet hum of the city, and feeling the warmth of human connection she had never expected to experience so fully. Before she passed, she reflected on her life with gratitude. She had lived simply, endured hardships, given freely, and been remembered. She had seen firsthand how kindness can grow, return, and inspire generations. And in her final days, she felt no fear, only peace, knowing that the lessons she had taught through her life would continue through the people she had touched and the foundation that bore her name. When she passed, the city mourned quietly. Travelers who remembered the flower seller came to the shop to leave flowers. People she had helped through the foundation shared stories of her courage and kindness. And the man who had once been a young, lost traveler stood in the garden one last time, holding a small bunch of jasmine flowers, remembering the night it all began. Her legacy lived on in every act of kindness, every flower given freely, and every life she had touched. The story of the old woman who had sold flowers at the station became a reminder to the world. Simple gestures matter. Small acts of care can ripple across time, and the human heart has the power to create miracles, sometimes in ways we cannot imagine. And so, the quiet flower seller, who had once survived on hope alone, left a world that remembered her, honored her, and carried her lessons forward. Her life, marked by humility, courage, and kindness, became a testament to the truth that even the smallest acts can change lives forever, and that love and care, once given freely, never truly fade. Her flowers continue to bloom in gardens, in shops, and in the hearts of those she had touched, reminding everyone who saw them that the world is better because of simple, quiet kindness. The man continued to live his life with the same lessons she had taught him: to notice, to remember, to act, and to honor the small gestures that make life meaningful. And in every act of kindness he offered, he carried the memory of the woman who had shown him the power of a gentle heart, a patient spirit, and a single bunch of flowers given at exactly the right moment. In the end, her story proved one simple truth: no act of kindness is ever wasted, and sometimes the smallest gesture from the humblest hands can create the greatest miracles in the richest lives. The world moved on, as it always does. People came and went, stations grew busier, and life continued. But somewhere quietly, the memory of an old woman who sold flowers, and the young man she had once helped, lived on, inspiring countless others to give freely, care deeply, and believe in the beauty of small acts. And the flowers bloomed year after year in memory of a life that had changed everything, quietly, gently, and beautifully.